Alliance, Silicon Valley, so we can so people can watch this later. We already have our first meetings video posted there. In case you're interested, we discussed the challenges of cloud technologies from a security perspective, what the future awaits for us, and challenges from a customer perspective. Today, we're going to, as Vishwas mentioned, focus on cloud native security with a focus on Security Operations Center. As the cloud environment changes, scales, more applications and services are added by the platform providers, it brings a whole new set of challenges for the security and monitoring aspect of things. So as this evolves, how does the people who actually monitor the security, ensure things that are happening properly, adapt to it? Do the traditional SOCs or Security Operations Center continue as they are, or do they evolve into newer, larger scale versions of themselves, whether they're staffed by people or automation? So today we'll be discussing this with Dr. Anton and Dimitri. And please, Anton and Dimitri, we'll go with name. Anton, Dr. Anton, please feel free to introduce yourself, and then we'll have Dimitri, and then we can take the questions from here.
Sure, of course, happy to. So my interest in this topic kind of started way before I became a Gartner analyst a good number of years ago, 2011. So I've dealt with SIEM for a good number of years, and of course SIEM was a centerpiece of a SOC in a traditional model. So since that time, I've spent a good number of years talking to different people who have built in security operations centers, running them when I was an analyst. And today I am at Google dealing with some of the security operations and data security topics. I ended up at Google through Chronicle acquisition. So this is kind of my passion and background in this topic.
Thank you, Anton. Dimitri, please.
Hi, this is Dimitri. So a little bit about me. Right now I'm heading up cloud security at Automation Anywhere. So dealing quite a lot with this particular question and topic at hand. How do we build Security Operations Center for the future, for the cloud native applications and tooling? Prior to that, I spent some time with AWS, helped a number of their clients establish cloud security programs, including Security Operations Center, their detective and responsive controls. And prior to that, I've been in a number of different organizations in the security space for about 20 years now.
Cool. Thank you, Dimitri, for the info, and Anton as well. So we'll start with the first question. As I alluded to already, how do we really define cloud native for a SOC? Does it mean a SOC for a company that only uses cloud services and no on-prem data centers? Or is it for companies that run only cloud native services? I mean, for cloud-only companies, do they even need a SOC, or can we go SOC-less?
1 minute.
And for the new joiners, please, if you could please mute so we can have a good audio quality, that'd be great. Thank you.
Sure, I'm happy to start, by the way, because it's sort of I guess the idea originally came from a discussion, but I was possibly an inspiration for it. So in my Gartner days, I've dealt a lot with kind of defining a modern SOC model or a kind of modernizing SOC, and I've dealt a lot of this, and there's even a paper written on this. So, however, when I thought about modern SOC, I didn't necessarily tie it to cloud or cloud native services because you may have a modern approach on premise. So for this discussion today, I wanted to sort of narrow it from like how to SOC today to how to do a SOC if all you have is cloud services, maybe cloud native services, other things deployed in the cloud. And I wanted to see whether the impression that I'm hearing from some circles that if you are a heavily cloud native company, that you don't need a SOC, things are somehow done magically elsewhere and you can have SOC-less monitoring. So I wanted to sort of potentially contest with you and say, no, 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 no. SOC is just evolving into something different, something other than people sitting in chairs watching monitors in the same big room. But I don't think that you're truly going SOC-less, because you would have a center of detection and response expertise, if not a traditional big room with swivel chairs. So to me, how do we adopt SOC, Security Operations Center, to the model where you may not have much of a data center, you may not have much of server racks and traditional stuff, but you have mostly cloud and cloud native services. A very quick addition to this. The reason I wanted to say cloud native and not cloud, and this is kind of a sad reason, because I do see a fair number of clients, organizations, and I've seen them in the past and I see them today, who kind of move to the cloud without moving to the cloud. They kind of copy their practices, tools, and mistakes, yes, mistakes, from data center to cloud. So their cloud deployments aren't really cloud native. They're kind of more data center copied to the cloud. And to me, they may well use a traditional SOC. There's no real need for any change, perhaps. I'll stop here and give, obviously, Dmitri's side. His is more practical.
Thanks, Anton. Well, I tend to agree. In a cloud native or cloud heavy organization, you still need someone with a set of responsibilities to be able to have the appropriate security visibility, be able to detect and respond to certain security alerts and incidents when that happens. I think when we call something cloud native, as the way that I think about it, it's cloud native tooling, right? That kind of grew up within cloud specific environments. And so when we kind of put cloud native in front of a SOC, in my mind, that is really using cloud native tools or adapting SOC processes, security processes, to nicely integrate with cloud native tools to drive security visibility and detection capabilities.
So you'd emphasize tools and not so much practices, like say Agile, all the other modern models. I hate to say DevOps in this case, but probably DevOps too. You would say focus on tools, not on practices, right? Or am I wrong? Sorry for interruption.
No worries. I think your practices have to be supported by the tools, and as tools may be adjusting to be quote unquote cloud native. So, for example, heavily API-driven integration and providing that capability. As tooling changes, the capabilities adjust, but nevertheless, I think the process of someone being able to gain the visibility, being able to get alerted, and then have some way to investigate a certain alert is, day-to-day security operations center tasks that have to be still performed in the cloud native SOC.
So this is actually a good one. I wish somebody from the audience would kind of later bring up a question about this, because it sounds like you're kind of saying that if you are containers and microservices heavy, you will naturally become DevOps and not the other way around. Like tools would drive processes.
Well, I think the security teams have to adjust their tooling and their practices based on the overall organizational tools and applications, right? So really, if you are heavily containerized, if you are heavily cloud company, you have to adjust your tooling. You have to be able to get into CI/CD pipeline. You have to understand how changes are being made within your environment, and then try to, as much as possible, seamlessly integrate your security tooling into those processes, and then certainly understand, taxonomy of logs that are generated. And again, I'm thinking from somebody who is, trying to secure a SaaS platform, something that's written within the organization. So really trying to understand the taxonomy of those logs and how to alert and really understand when something that you should be looking at happens within an environment.
So quick question. It sounds like the cloud native strategy involves both retooling and adapting the SOPs or standard operating procedures. So where should a company that's moving to cloud, or they're already there but still using the old ways, adapt to this? Where should they start?
That is a tough one, frankly, because I think we have, among our prepared questions, we have things that refer to examples where people try to adapt tools that were born on premise, like EDR, traffic monitoring, or a few others, but they don't always fit the changed technology, right? But to me, they also don't always fit the changed processes. Dimitri brought up a CI/CD pipelines and containers, containers in particular, right? Like I'm going to have my agent that I use for security tasks, I don't know, my EDR or whatever, and I'm going to look at, and it's like, wait a second, it doesn't really fit. Like, where do I stick it? It's containers all over the place. So I've seen people who kind of like try to go with on-prem tools into the retooled modern environment, especially when security team is coming to the game lately, and the result isn't very happy. So frankly, I don't think I have a magical answer about like what to do if IT changed, but you, the security team, didn't.
Yeah. I wonder how many people have said, well, bake that security agent into your container.
Yes, I wish people can unhear it, but
Yeah, don't say that.
But from a SOC perspective, from a tooling perspective, that's the case. From a SOC perspective, would it be a good practice to translate the standard operating procedures into automation and go totally SOC-less?
Well, if you can translate everything into automation, I think it's a bit of a nirvana from my perspective. That could possibly be it, but then you still have to have, at the end of the day, what is the objective of the SOC, right? It's being able to have the visibility, being able to detect security incidents and respond to them. So it doesn't matter what we call it, doesn't matter how much automation we put on it, there still have to be someone within an organization with those set of responsibilities. And if we offload that set of responsibilities to non-security focused or people in the organization, then I would imagine that there would be clash of priorities.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that if your process doesn't fit the environment, and then somebody says, "Hey, let's automate it," this to me sounds like a bit of a disaster. Like it's a bigger disaster because hey, automation makes everything bigger and faster, right? We all know that. So to me, this sounds like a quintessential recipe for failure, right? If your process doesn't fit and you're having trouble adapting the processes, and then somebody shows up and says, "Hey, the answer is automation." I mean, that sounds like a really, really bad answer, right? Because like you're going to automate process that doesn't fit. That sounds like it's going to end badly, with almost certainty, right?
Great.
Yeah.
Please, the last words on this question, and then we can move on to the tooling side of things.
Oh, no, I wanted just to kind of I agree with Anton and just add that prior to automation, we have to have people running these processes and then really understanding, how to do certain things, and only then we can try to automate certain components that make sense for automation. Trying to automate everything usually just trying to boil the ocean.
Yeah. And then to as a final remark, to conclude this, like a mini conclusion of this, recently I've did a Twitter poll on do people think remediating threats automatically is still a bad idea in the cloud, or is it more likely, more possible in the cloud? And there are a lot of really good comments and discussion on this. So to me, it seems like the automation, the crowd was kind of split pretty evenly. Some people said, if you don't know how to do it on premise, and if you're failing at the most basic automated response on premise, you'd still fail in the cloud. Yet the other half of the commenters basically said, no, cloud is different. We have reliable asset management, we have APIs, we have this, we have that, we have heavily automated IT. Yes, you can automate threat response. And by the way, threat response, not vulnerability. Vulnerability is a separate story. And to me, this was like really, the discussion itself taught me something, that it's still there's still a strong debate. Some people brought up examples of what they do. Like if they have reliable evidence that a certain instance is compromised, they cut it. But that relies on a lot of dependencies in the environment. So to me, automation is kind of very tricky subject. So hopefully we'll revisit it later. Thank you very much for this. Let's go switch to visibility, the next question.
Sure, yes, definitely. Well, do you think traditional tools like SIM, EDR, network detection and response belong on a cloud-native SOC? If they do, what is better for it? In network monitoring or endpoint monitoring? Um, if we could start over with these questions, that'd be great. Or how do we do visibility triad?
Dmitry, go first. I mean, this is it's like
Okay.
I
All
kind of know
right.
what I
I'll
would
go
say, but I'd
first.
rather you trap yourself.
All right. Let's see. How can I do this best? So I think that an aggregator of logs is definitely something that has to be there, right? We want to call it SIM, log management, whatever it is. It's very important, and I think that going all the way from your application layer and truly understanding, how the application logs are laid out, how to be able to detect certain inconsistencies or peaks and valleys so that you can pick out in a large environment something that you have to be paying attention to from a security perspective. Having EDR, NDR, and network-related capabilities do not necessarily, I think, have as much value if they are deployed in a traditional sense, right? However, one of the things that I've been, I think, from a strategy perspective, looking at is how do I bring in the cloud? How do I bring security control and visibility closer where the actual data assets are? And that usually lended itself to looking at some kind of an agent to put onto a workstation or a server in the cloud. So from there, you can actually look at the network traffic as well as look at the logs on a particular machine to being able to better understand really what's happening, hopefully remove some of the false positives there. So that's what I sort of seen in happening is kind of using agent-based. And another, I think, an important thing to consider is that from a scalability perspective in the cloud, as we think of, doing a capital investment and buying some traditional network appliance and expecting that you can really understand what capacity you will need in the cloud, that becomes very difficult. So having an agent and being able to deploy that agent and grow as your capacity needs grow in the cloud, that's also something that could be helpful if we think from an agent-based perspective.
So let me two things. I want to kind of gently push back on some of this by referring back to your own comments. Like, if I'm heavily container-based, microservices-based, hey, agents, really? Like, where do you put it? Like, that's one possible kind of question. Because to me, when I started looking at this in my analyst days, I've seen people who truly believe they're cloud native basically shy away from both endpoint and network. And of course, we are in complete agreement on the login, so that's all there. The other part that I wanted to share and hopefully have Dmitry respond is, I got into a fight with another analyst in my analyst days who basically said that if I am truly cloud native and if I use a lot of software as a service, SaaS, then CASB is kind of my SIM. And of course, my reaction was quite violent. I was like, no, CASB is not a SIM, you're wrong. But he explained the scenario where, what if I don't have a data center? What if I don't have IIS? What if I just use mostly SaaS? Maybe I'm a small company, but I use a lot of SaaS. What is my central monitoring console? Hey, it's a CASB. And again, I still wanted to argue with him. It was a good number of years ago. But today, I almost got some respect for this position, because if you are SaaS heavy and cloud native, I don't know. I mean, doing log analysis of all the disjoint SaaS services, some of them don't even have login, it's painful. There's nowhere to put the agent. There's nowhere to sniff traffic. Mm-hmm. Either you're doing workstation side monitoring, as Dmitry wisely pointed out, or you're kind of lost, and CASB is really it. So I am now a bit less aggressive arguing against this position, and maybe Dmitry has more to say here, I'm sure, because he's dealt with this.
So the first question around kind of heavily containerized environment and what do we do from a security perspective to get the appropriate visibility? So first of all, the host is at risk as well. And so visibility at the host level, which are running, so like your worker nodes in Kubernetes, it is very important to have the visibility of who is logging in into those hosts. Are there any sort of a Docker-based exploits that may be happening from a certain container? The other thing is many of the sort of next generation Kubernetes-ready, container-ready tools allow you to deploy this as a sidecar or a daemon set within, for example, a Kubernetes environment that give you a level of visibility across all of the containers running within a worker node. So there are architectures now that actually allow you to be able to deploy a piece of software, let's just call it that, into your either Kubernetes or containerized workloads, right? So that is definitely possible, and I've had experience with multiple of those vendors. Mm-hmm. When it comes to a SaaS platform, I think I agree it's somewhat different, right? We don't have any sort of security visibility outside of just whatever the API from the cloud provider will offer. So you may be able to, for example, integrate with their logging API to pull down the logs. So who is accessing it when they're accessing it. And then you certainly have a CASB. CASB also comes with its number of challenges. It will slow things down if you're really a large organization and have many users that are using a certain SaaS platform, proxying everything through proxy, which could potentially become a problem and a bottleneck for you. And then just setting it up in a way that those proxies, essentially what CASBs are, cannot be bypassed by users with some level of knowledge is also something that we need to be paying attention to.
By the way, there are some comments from the audience, which in my view, in my experience, are correct. They point out that there are other ways apart from sidecars. Yes, there are like 3 or 4 visibility mechanisms there. So that's legit, but it kind of doesn't change the game, right? Like that still is,
it's some piece of software that is meant to provide security visibility that you have to deploy into your containerized either Kubernetes worker nodes or whatever that may be. So let's take a look. Yeah, so that's.
I think there was a question around serverless. How would you even monitor serverless payloads, containers, and traditional instances? I think we covered that, but how about serverless?
Jim, I can take that. In the serverless world, if you see the way things are moving, right, especially in the cloud with what Google is doing with Knative and others, the way serverless functions are deployed, as an example, right, are deployed on top of containers. Of course, the user doesn't provide the container, but they're run on top of containers. And if you see new services that have come out more recently from either Google or Amazon, I think Amazon calls it extensions, where they allow you to actually have an agent running in the same context as the function, so you could be running your security tooling, your monitoring, and so on the same level. That's where the world is. At least that's what the cloud providers are provided. But whether it's good or not, that's a different.
Yeah, but also here's the sorry for turning it into a religious debate, but like we don't have a super strict definition of cloud native, and I've met people in my analyst days who would say that agent approach is like never cloud native. I don't know whether it's too extreme, but it's a position I've encountered. So people say, hey, you want to actually go cloud native, but like you're trying to retrofit it to the world of agents. So does this position have merit in your view or not? Or is it too much about like black and white? Is it truly cloud native, pure cloud native or not? I don't have any view here. So like maybe you do.
I mean, I think one size will not fit all here, right? What is your attack surface? What are you really trying to protect? Even the cloud has a number of consumption models, right? For your infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service, and it will depend. So cloud, I think, is a very loaded word.
Great. I think we can. The threat modeling aspect actually
Jim,
brings
there's
up
one more question from David Levitsky. David, do you want to just bring that up before we move forward?
Sure.
Yeah, thanks for taking the question. Thanks for asking the first one. I think like something that I'm struggling with is understanding kind of exactly what you said about retrofitting. So you have your traditional approach if you have an agent everywhere, but now when you have something like Fargate, you bring your own container, you have no access to the host. Maybe you have no access to even kernel capabilities to be able to like monitor syscalls. at that point in time, like, does it make sense to have any security monitoring, or do you just kind of throw your hands up and say it's not my host? You know, hope that the container is, and really try to shift left. So you do static analysis of the source code, you do image scanning of the Docker file. Like from that point on, do you really get anything valuable from being able to see the processes running on your container? Because it's supposed to be ephemeral, right?
I think it's a shared responsibility question here, right? You are essentially trusting your cloud provider. You know, we're not talking here about hypervisors, right? And chassis and so on, and how they're managing their data center. So we're kind of, we kind of accepted that the cloud provider is securing their physical infrastructure, right? And as we sort of start going up the stack and allowing the cloud provider to manage more and more of our infrastructure, right? We have to put the trust in that cloud provider that says, well, they are, certifying that they're doing certain things. You can go for like AWS, Azure, Microsoft, and so on. Take a look at what services have what kind of certifications that are available. I know that does not give us a visibility that we want, but at some point, as we get more of the services coming from cloud providers, we have to account that they're doing their part, and from a security perspective as well.
Yeah, this ends up, I mean, I obviously can rattle off a long list of features all the way down to binary authorization that Google Cloud has built. But as a monitoring detection guy, I'm still nervous. Like, I can only trust the environment that I monitor. I don't see, frankly, I don't see, some of my colleagues may hate me for it, but I think that however trusted the environment is, I still wouldn't trust it unless there's a way to monitor. So to me, transparency doesn't compete with, binary provenance, any other preventative features. To me, I still want to see, sorry, maybe it's my detection monitoring brains talking, but no matter how trusted the environment is in the way it's built, procured, deployed, I still want the visibility.
So when
I'll compromise on that.
So when you have, like, the shared responsibility model makes a lot of sense to me, and I think the host is kind of a given, right? You trust GCP, Azure, AWS, whatever. From a SOC perspective, like, as you just mentioned, your mind is kind of, is there anything bad running in the corporate environment or cloud environment, whatever? So again, when you have the host abstracted, you just have a container running on a host that you can't control. Like, from a SOC perspective, are you able to say whether that container is behaving, if the application on that container is behaving well or is behaving not well? Like, have you seen strategies to be able to look at you have a Kubernetes cluster, you have a bunch of containers on it, you say this application is not compromised, it is behaving exactly as it should be. Like, what does that look like?
I mean, we still haven't touched on traffic analysis. I mean, obviously most of this traffic we are talking about is encrypted, but there are some tricks people play, more than tricks, some tools that kind of give you some of the analysis, of course, flow analysis, metadata. So it's still, I feel, and of course the logs from services. So I still feel like I'm going to fight this fight with primarily login and maybe with network monitoring as well. If I am absolutely shut down from anything on the endpoint completely, I would take my chances with logs and traffic. Good chances, separate story, but I'd take them.
We'll take one more question. There's another question from Suneja for Anton. Do you expect the lines to blur between site reliability engineering and cloud-native SOC? What are your comments on that, Anton? And do you expect chaos engineering to be security function?
I mean, we all read, hopefully, well, I read it, but like, hopefully you read the book that, my colleagues at Google put together, Building Secure and Reliable Systems. I'll just have this as a quick kind of ad for the book. I mean, it's a free book, so nobody's making money on it. But the point is that building a secure and reliable system, the entire book kind of expresses this view in the best way possible. And it's written by really smart people here at Google who kind of mostly practice what you just said. So read the book and you get your admittedly over-engineered answer to that question. But the answer is, to give you a short answer, the answer is yes. Yeah, go read the book. I'll drop a link. We'll drop a link in the chat later. But if you search for building secure and reliable systems, you'd have the entire book that expresses that view.
Okay.
Jim, I think you can go on.
Sorry, are we touching the next question on the threat side, or are we continuing on the? We also want to hit the skills, right? The skills side we haven't touched. To me.
Yeah. Sorry, I was muted there for a moment, talking to myself. So yeah, we touched upon the function of SOC and the differences and transitions that you might have to go through when you're going cloud native. But from a person that's part of a SOC, is there a difference for this person? Do they need to, for an analyst, do they need to have software development skills? What's the difference between a traditional SOC member and a SOC that focuses on cloud native deployments?
Yeah. Can I make a quick comment before Dmitry goes into this? Like, this is the topic that kind of got us a little bit arguing on our prep call, right? Where I mean, there's like really strong view that in many companies, the SOC does not have social engineering skills, and that's kind of a fact of life. And of course, people from the top tier cloud native companies would say that no, you have to have a software engineering skills, otherwise you can't really join this new world of cloud native. So I don't really know. I think it's a good arguments on both sides. So I wish somebody can give me an answer.
I'll try to give an answer, and then we can have a dialogue. So from my experience, for that a SOC analyst usually, as I agree, does not have a lot of security or software development skills. However, in the cloud native environment, majority of the visibility that we're going to be getting is going to be in JSON formats. It's going to be in some kind of a logging management system that probably has its APIs. You're going to be interfacing with another ticketing system that's probably also is driven through an API integration. And if you would like to be able to automate or really get to a level where you can scale your SOC with, I'm sure you will all have this, not enough people, software development skills become extremely important for SOC analysts. And what I've also seen, and I don't know if, Anton, you've seen the same or different, is where you may have more senior people on the SOC team have some software development skills, or just a dedicated number of folks on the team that have that software development experience and are able to really help automate what the SOC analysts are doing manually.
So I have all the compassion in the world for this, but I just like imagine me in my Gartner days giving advice to a client who's building a SOC, and let's say they're a small, I don't know, a small credit union or community bank, and they're just hired their first 2 security analysts, and they're trying to do some kind of a hybrid model with an MSSP. And then suddenly I show up and say, hey guys, sorry guys, just get rid of those SOC analysts. You must hire SOC analysts with software engineering skills. This is really bad advice. And it's also quite impractical for a lot of companies. So I don't really know. I get the winds are blowing in that way, and I get that to interact with modern environments, with modern development practices, you kind of have to know it. But I'm still afraid to say, hey, stake in the ground, a modern SOC, cloud native SOC, you have to have at least some development experience. So I'm torn. I'm being honest here. I see this as kind of going that way, but I'm also see that many companies cannot go that way.
So, quick question on that front: would shift left also work for security or SOC duties as well? Would the responsibilities shift towards the developers or the people who are actually releasing the applications or the infrastructure itself, since everything is going to be based on software, whether it's Terraform and other types of tooling there? Does the duty of security and responding to things shift to the developer side?
Well, poor developers, because everything is shifting into their queue, right? They're now, build your code, support your code in production, now also support security in production. So I'm not exactly sure how much developers can take on.
I mean, nervous laugh is the right answer, right? Like, imagine you're facing a challenge. Who do I hire? A SOC engineer who can code, or a software developer who knows threat actors? This is like a head scratcher.
Yeah.
I think for most companies, the answer is neither. They look like pink unicorns if you are a small bank in Kansas or something.
Yeah, and it
Guys,
sounds like
quick.
Go
I got
ahead.
a question. So we keep saying software developers, but I prefer the term who can code better, because there's a difference between a guy who can scrap together some code to connect to an API, maybe parse a data set using pandas and give you some kind of intelligent output, versus a software developer. So for example, I feel confident that I can hack together some code, and there's plenty of folks in the security space that can do that.
Yep.
I think when we say software developer, I'd love to have a more articulate opinion on that very specific point. In the SOC, do you need a software developer, or do you need a person who is not afraid to write a few lines of code? Because that to me is a distinction that I think is important. Yeah. So can you offer some thoughts there?
I'm just tempted to toss it to Dmitry, frankly, because I think like his fact base and his experience is more useful for this.
Well, I'll kind of say it depends, right? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to build automation at scale, and you have a extremely large environment where you're going to be receiving, gigabytes, terabytes of data that you have to integrate somehow? Then you probably want a developer, right? But if you're just trying to automate and integrate with an API, do some, serverless security where you're getting something from one API, sending it to another, or opening up a ticket. I think somebody with a background in scripting and some willingness to learn and pick up a book and understand how to do some coding in some of your basic Bash, Python, Go. I think that is really the 80% of the skills that we want to see in SOC.
Fair point, but I think to me there's still a bit of a chasm, because like imagine you are configuring your Unix server, you're changing syslog.conf, you're doing it in the classic way with servers, and then suddenly you're told, hey dude, it's not about the syslog.conf. Here's a library. It gets injected into an app, and that library would output JSON that you can load into your SIEM. Just like make sure this is integrated. Like that's not really Bash scripting basics. This is kind of, well, you need to have more than that. You need to be able to not just like travel from Bash to Python, but like you have to be more of a developer. But I think I'm with Dmitry that it depends. But I fear that even the lower range is still tricky for some of the more traditional SOCs. Like that's going to be a challenge. I mean, this is Silicon Valley, so it's not a challenge here. But I fear that if this vision becomes more popular, it would be quite a bit of a challenge for a lot of companies not in Silicon Valley.
But would there be benefit? I guess. Challenge, yes, challenges can be solved. But would there be a benefit if people would try to hire into a SOC with a development background, or at least scripting background? I would say there would be definitely a lot of benefit.
Sure, agreed. And I think that we wouldn't fall into the same chasm as we did with some analytics. Again, another example from my Gartner days. Some people wanted to hire people who are security experts and data scientists. And a good number of years ago, I used to joke that there are roughly 5 people who have great skills in data science and great skills in security. And I mean 5 per planet. This was my example from 2013. So now there are more than 5. Yeah. But it was a really short list of people who can do solid data analytics, data science, and solid security. It's like, no, sorry guys, this used to be a really short list. I fear that we might be in the same land with like skilled developer who's also a skilled threat expert.
Yes.
Okay, it's a painful subject. Let's just skip it.
It's a controversial subject. Let's just
it is
agree to disagree and move on.
Yes, it is challenging. And in my personal experiences, I've seen security analysts paired with, let's say, a machine learning expert or some other software development domain expert function the best, because then you can have the best of both worlds, and they can be more productive.
That's the advice we ended up writing up in the paper, by the way, in the Gartner paper. That was exact this advice. This exact advice is what we wrote up, is basically pair people. Don't try to fire crazy unicorn people, just pair them. Yeah,
Yes.
That's exactly what I said. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. So let's talk about threat modeling and threat intelligence. What is the role of these, let's say, paradigms when you're looking at the cloud-native SOC?
I have a brief point to make. Maybe Dmitry, do you have something to start?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Anton. Go ahead and start.
So I feel like this is another area where, as we start to dig deeper into the visibility inside the applications, we may have to again touch the subject we just abandoned. Namely, do you need to know what happens inside the application to truly threat model? And of course, the answer is yes. But we sort of combine together threat intel, like who's out to get you, and threat modeling, namely what sort of threat scenarios your applications and systems may face. But I suspect that if you are in this cloud-native SOC, cloud-native visibility land, you may have to, again, learn more about what things happen inside the application to know what the threat actor can do, what sort of damage they can take. So to me, the role is probably going to go up. And again, this is something that we would need to kind of combine this application-heavy monitoring with the same emphasis on threat intelligence. It's a bit vague. I don't have anything crisp here, so hoping for more from Dmitry here.
Yeah, I mean, I think this one is you have to do threat modeling, and you have to be able to ingest or understand threat intel and use it independently of you running in the cloud or in the your on-prem data center. I think the attack surface and really understanding where are certain threats coming from and how to address them would change, because in the cloud native world, right, essentially your applications or your systems do have, in majority of cases, some external internet level of access. And how do you manage that? How do you understand and be able to detect if any of those vectors are being used to access your application in the way that would be risky is I think critical when it comes to threat modeling in the cloud. Really understanding that, and that would be imperative.
Yeah, and then to conclude this, I think it's a comment from a former colleague, actually earlier today on Twitter, where he said that in an on-premise world, you can make an application security mistake, and you can make a network security mistake, and unless you make both, you may still be secure. But if you're in the cloud, if you make one mistake, you kind of tossed, right? If you made an access mistake on the app and the app is exposed to the internet, you're done. There's no firewall. There's no, oh, this is deep inside the perimeter. Nobody knows it's there. That chance is not there anymore. So I feel like that's a reasonable point. Like, you have to threat model in a world that's connected.
Yeah, how many of us think of threat modeling and think of a GitHub repo and having access keys stored by a developer, right? And we have to, in the cloud world, bring that into our threat modeling exercises.
Yeah. By the way, we have about 10 minutes left, so should we go through the Q&A bucket to see whether there are any fun questions there?
There's a question for Many. If you want to jump in, and we can field the other questions, but I think we've covered most of the questions that were already asked. And if we haven't, please feel free to jump in.
Sure. I'll be brief, I think. Hey, so this is Many. So I spent a lot of time thinking about this space. I'm from Simplified. So a lot of thought I have. And my question is, with you guys' experience, have you seen this type of stock actually exist? Like, is this something we're actually facing and actually have a need for, prevalent need this year? Or is this more of a conceptual, probably will happen, I agree with this, a few years down the line? How close are we to the actual, this type of methodology actually being used for the cloud native? And have you seen this successful and maybe somewhere or whatever? What do you think about that?
I mean, the initial inspiration for this, I feel, at least in my mind, came from reading all the stuff that Netflix people published in their SOC-less detection paper, right? And So to me, obviously, it exists. Whether it exists in only a few places, and all of the places are perhaps within 20 miles from us in Silicon Valley, very possible. But yeah, it kind of does exist. And whether it exists in a very limited number of companies, that's a separate story.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, Dmitry has kind of that, right, to a large extent in his company.
For sure.
And I think we have another question from Kshitij.
Yeah, so this question was either for Dimitri or for Anton. How do we expect forensics and evidence gathering to evolve in a cloud-native world? Think about containers and serverless functions. The fact that the shared responsibility models for these cloud-native apps is still a work in progress. How do we expect forensics and evidence gathering to evolve by the time we hit 2030?
I would. Unfortunately, I have to kind of punt it, probably as a good subject for later discussion. Maybe we should have a session focused on IR and forensics in the cloud. I have kind of tidbits of info here and there, but I don't have a good structure in my head about how this would get resolved. So I'd rather not answer.
I'll try to briefly answer. I think plan your incident response and forensics. Understand how you would be collecting, where the data is, and where you will be storing it, and what are your legal requirements, right? And then work with your cloud provider or understand the shared responsibility model when it comes to forensics. What can you get and what can't you get from your cloud providers? Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. By the way, there's a question. We had a question on our roster to discuss, and I think the same question just came from an audience. We had a question about what's the role of a cloud provider in a cloud-native SOC, and I think one of the audience members asked, can you fully trust the cloud provider SIEM, for example? So I think that's a worthy discussion, and of course I can I have my nuclear hat back there. You guys probably don't see it, so I can sort of take a bit of a vendor stance on this, but I think it's a useful discussion. If you're cloud native, you're in somebody's cloud. So what about that person whose cloud it is? Would they be of help? Would they be, doing most of the work? Like, what's the story here? Maybe I should go second because I've kind of asked myself the question myself.
Well, I think the reality is that if you are in the cloud and you are using all of your SaaS and IaaS type of environments, you have really no other choice, right? And so picking the appropriate vendor that you feel comfortable with, cloud vendor, that has the set of certifications that you're looking for. Certification doesn't always equal security, but at least it's a good start. You really have to understand the cloud provider and are they mature enough for you to feel comfortable using them or not, right? And so that's, in my mind, unfortunately, there aren't a lot of options that we have if our IT or business is pushing some organizations into the cloud.
True, and I would say that one of the papers I've written in my Gartner days was a kind of set of architectures for doing security monitoring in the public cloud environment, and we had a certain set of architectures outlined that relied either on third-party products, maybe on more traditional products, and of course on the service provider controls. So to me, if I recall from that paper, I don't have it anymore, but some people would basically say that because they're by design multi-cloud, and again, I'm not judging the merits of the strategy, they just are, it's a fact. Will the single cloud provider SIEM, for example, be good enough for their multi-cloud environment? I mean, I would say the answer is it depends. Again, my original home, before it became Google Chronicle, definitely covered more than just GCP. In fact, it covered things outside of GCP somewhat better at times. The idea is still a question of trust sometimes. So imagine the technology works well. Would you trust a SIEM, for example, from cloud provider 1 to monitor cloud provider 1? Question number 1. And would you trust them to monitor cloud provider 2 and 3? That's another question. So question number 1 becomes, do I trust their own technology to monitor their environment? They know more how to do it. They have more integration. But what about separation? Hey, good question. And then the other one is, would I trust them to monitor the other guy? Well, that also has questions here. So I think it's a tricky debate. I think that's something we'll be fighting for a good number of years. I think there are strong arguments in favor of, yes, I would trust them because they know better. It's their cloud. And sometimes the answer is, no, not really. I'm going to have a third party do it. So I don't know. I don't want to judge. I've seen people succeed down both paths. I don't think that one path is necessarily automatically right for everybody, but it's a tricky one. No debate here.
Okay, we have a few minutes left, and I think there are two more questions going in sequence here. David, would you like to ask your question if it hasn't been answered already?
Yeah, I'll keep it really quick. Thanks. Just a question about eBPF. I've seen a lot of hype about it recently. I think GCP now uses Cilium in their data plane. Falco is like a C and CF supported project. Kind of curious on your thoughts for using eBPF for security instrumentation versus the kind of traditional monitoring based on the audit system like OS Query and tools like that. Do you see eBPF kind of being the future of security instrumentation, or you think the old tools are still going to get the job done? There's no reason to replace them?
I mean, you're referring to the network library, right, for network monitoring?
I think it can do like syscall tracing as well. It's there's like a conference last week with this coming around. I think it does like syscall tracing, and yeah, you can do the network monitoring too. I think it gets like new features every month or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Generally speaking, eBPF can hook into anything that traverses the user line kernel side of things. It's network or any other things. It's not only for monitoring, it could be also used for policy-driven approaches too.
Yep. I mean, this to me a bigger part of the bigger bucket of observability inside the system, inside the app. And my impression is it's going to be growing in importance, but I also feel like it's kind of a medium-term thing, more like it's something that I started seeing more. I mean, not necessarily this approach. I've seen more kind of observability movement. People bring this up as a way to go do security and of course availability and of course performance monitoring. It's not something I encounter a lot in my daily practice, but I just know it exists, and I know that it's supposed to be rising in importance, and I'd be looking for evidence that it does, right? At least that's my answer. It's a bit of a shifty answer, but that's the best I have here.
And one aspect that I can bring in as well for large-scale environments, due to the better performance it brings in, eBPF is preferred. Is the preferred technique to monitor rather than doing a lot of let's say agent-driven approaches. eBPF type monitoring can add a lot of value on the network monitoring, performance monitoring, and enforcing actually policies from, let's say, blocking network traffic to disabling processes from executing depending on the criteria you set. So eBPF has been gaining a lot of, let's say, popularity due to the performance side of things and the depth you can dive into in the kernel.
Awesome, thanks a lot.
I think Matthew had a question.
Sure, yeah. We have no time left, so I'll try and boil this one down.
Squeezing out as much as we can.
But yeah, I appreciate it. It's been a very interesting conversation. Wish we had more time. So as the kind of the idea of corporations network evolves, as people like solutions like SASE evolve, people think about how their network changes and the boundary of that changes, connecting the clouds and making the boundaries of their enterprise network a little bit different as far as people have previously thought of them. And so I think this ties into how we think about SaaS and FAS solutions as well. So I guess I was throwing out that question around how do we think about what is that contract between the provider and their consumer as far as what should that visibility level be, or how do you see that changing in this environment where we're not just changing the technologies we use and putting into the cloud, but we're changing where that data lives and how it moves and who controls it. So we'll leave that bomb at the end there.
Yeah, I wish there was a easy 30-second answer to this. You bringing up SASE is kind of frankly disturbing because SASE itself is probably a good 1 hour to define, by the way, before we discuss it.
Well, that's the point, right? There's so many different things changing here in the environment, right?
Yes. Do I have any piece of wisdom on this one? No. Hopefully Dimitri does.
That's an interesting question, and yeah, I think from kind of knowing and looking at your boundary, right, in the cloud, you are putting trust in your cloud provider, and focusing on. And I'm not familiar with SASE, so I might be also don't have probably a good way to answer your question.
Sorry. Well, thank you though.
Yeah, I tried.
Unfortunately, I am familiar with SASE, and that's why I'd rather not talk about it. I've seen. I was there when it was being invented, so by my esteemed colleague Neil McDonald. So this is very very fun, but unfortunately the result is kind of a little complex, right? Because and not easy to describe and pin to operational realities.
All right.
Sorry, anything optimistic at the end? A simple question,
Well, we're definitely out of time and a few minutes over. I think it's been a great conversation around the cloud native security in general and the SOC specifically. Thank you very much, Dr. Anton Chuvakin and Dimitri, for sharing your knowledge here and giving back to the community here. And thank you to everyone who has joined and listened. Thanks to Mushmi and Vishwas for joining me in moderating this great session where we've explored cloud native security operations and hopefully have given ideas to people and practitioners and people who want to get into the cloud side, ideas around what they should care about and what they should focus on. Again, thank you very much, everyone. And as we've already mentioned, this recording will be available online soon. And we have many more talks that are coming up that will be shedding more light on the cloud security side of things. And I think Dr. Anton also will follow up with a blog post if you want to talk about that.
Thanks for motivating me. Yes, eventually, but you really signed me up for a project here. But okay, yes, I did promise it, so it'll happen.
Well, thank you for that in advance. Looking forward to it. I'm sure it will be a valuable resource for everybody. All right.